Hi there, this is Solitude Ronan from Solitude Ronan Films, and welcome to another random review. Today's random review comes from 1974, and it's The Terminal Man, or El Hombre Terminal, starring George Segal, directed by Mike Hodges. This is a Spanish DVD, if you haven't guessed already. It comes with a lovely paper slipcover. It is Warner Brothers, and I think there is a Warner Brothers Blu-ray available, which I probably will be upgrading. I think this is a brilliant film, and again it really resonated with me for reasons I'll get into. Obviously Hodges, one of the most underappreciated British filmmakers, and after the success of Get Carter in 1974, he found himself in Los Angeles, pretty much alone apart from his agent, and he ended up doing this treatment of Michael Crichton's 1972 book of the same name. Now Crichton at the time allegedly really didn't like the film. Hodges adapted it himself for the screen, produced, directed it. But Hodges says in the Arrow documentary that's available, or the David Cairns documentary on the Arrow release of Croupier, he did say that he heard Michael Crichton before his death saying that The Terminal Man was actually the best adaptation of his work for the screen. Again, Hodges said whether that's true or not, but he didn't like it at the time. It wasn't a success when it came out. Partly, as Hodges explains in its premiere, there was a problem with the image and sound, so there were 10 minutes apart. For the first 10 minutes the sound wasn't there, and of course there's lots of dialogue, so it didn't start out on good footing. And again, it's not it's more a science fiction film of ideas rather than, set pieces and stuff like that. Hodges did change the ending to a far more cinematic ending than Crichton had in the book. It's a fairly mundane ending that Crichton had. And again, I think it's a much more meaningful and symbolic ending that Hodges shot. It stars George Segal in an interesting role for a star. Now, Segal was never like a huge star. He wasn't like Robert Redford or Paul Newman, but he was kind of that rung lower. He was an affable actor by all accounts, a good looking guy, but this is an interesting role that I think was turned down a lot because there's not a lot of dialogue for the character, Harry Benson, and it's not the most endearing roles, but you do feel for him, because again, that was, Hodges says that's one of the criticisms that the film got. There was nobody to root for, there's nobody that's likeable in it, but I think you do root for Harry to some extent. So the story is about Harry, who does have anger problems, does have violence problems. He's a brilliant scientist, but he does have problems. He is just a wife beater, basically. But Richard Dysart, or Copper from The Thing, there's actually two actors from The Thing, so they must have did this brain stuff and then went to Antarctica. Donald Moffat is in the film as well. And they are brain surgeons who think they can solve violence by adjusting the brain. Again, Crichton always had these fun ideas that, of course, we still talk about today, and obviously that's changed into gene therapy, and can we amplify or suppress certain genes, and obviously the Nazis were into eugenics and all of that as well. But this is, let's kind of cut down on violence and violent people by messing about with their brain. What could go wrong? What I love about the film, apart from the fun premise, is the look of it. It's very spare. Now, Hodges explains that there was scenes in hospitals and stuff like that were to have more extras, but he actually pared it down, so there's not actually that many characters in the film, which gives it a sense of it's futuristic, even though it's not. And he said that really came from his loneliness while being in LA. So there's not that many people about, which again gives it this eerie sense of desolation and isolation. It's a very Cronenberg film, even though this predates Cronenberg becoming Cronenberg. It has that kind of grey buildings, faceless authority, that kind of, they're not mad scientists, but just that this is our goal and we're not really interested in the details, like how it's affecting the actual person. We're more obsessed about the end goal. So it has a wonderful atmosphere of isolation and disconnection. Now, after the surgery, because when George Segal's character Harry Benson has the attacks, he blacks out, and then violence occurs, and there's a smell that he actually knows it's coming. So they mess with his brain. And then Joan Hackett plays a scientist. I'm a huge fan of Joan Hackett. I think she's really good in this. She was really good in the Sidney Lumet film The Group, but I haven't really seen her in too many films. I don't think she made that many films. Or certainly she hasn't made many films that I've seen. She died before she was 50, unfortunately. But she's really good in this, a really strong presence. And she plays the scientist, and there's a great scene where they have all the equipment in Segal's brain, and they're tweaking, his angry one, and he doesn't have a spell of anger, so they think is a success. His childlike one, his libido, and it goes through all of that, and Segal gives a good performance, as actors love to do. He goes through different moods, if you like. But then, of course, with the help of Jill Clayburgh, another actor who died way too early, he escapes and goes on a rampage. There's a wonderful scene where he does harm to somebody. Hodges uses slow motion really effectively, involving a waterbed, which is really good. There's really effective use of music in the film. It's quite I wouldn't say a long preamble, but it does kind of build up. Things aren't necessarily explained and signposted, and then it becomes essentially a chase film. But I just absolutely loved it. The performances are really excellent. Again, the look of the film, it feels like a dystopia, even though it's not actually set in the year 2315 or anything. And again, Hodges' decision to cut back on, the extras in the hospital, walking up and down the corridor and things like that, it really adds a dimension to the film. And then when you do get the finale, which does have some people in it, that feels kind of more epic and kind of brings the story, wider than perhaps Crichton's novel does. And as I said, the ending, which I'm not going to get into the specifics of it, but I just think symbolically the ending is really quite profound. As a 70s film, so you kind of can tell how it ends. Crichton with coma, and he's always about some grounding in science and the pushing of science, but then with the warning that it's not always going to work out, or if you forget about the people involved, you can do damage if, again, your sole focus is the end point and you're not actually taking care of the people along the way. But it really blew me away. Again, I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but it is for me one of the best Crichton based films. Yes, even better than Jurassic Park. And again, I kind of just lent into that isolation and loneliness that you get, you feel when watching the film. And as I said, I do think you do feel bad for Harry Benson, even though obviously when you find out what he's done at the start of the film, he's not perhaps the most likeable person. But again, and yes, some people get out of things by saying it's their brain, but after they've fiddled with it, it's definitely his brain. From 1974, was a disaster when it came out, but again, 50 years later, it certainly deserves a second look. 50 years later, probably deserves a second look before 50 years later, but it's well worth checking out because it is quite brilliant. And I will have to try and pick up a Blu-ray of it, even though the print on this isn't that bad, but certainly a Blu-ray, or heck, a 4K would look pretty impressive. Again, maybe it's just because it does have that Cronenberg feel, even though this is before Cronenberg, just in the locations and lovely grey faceless buildings. We all love faceless grey buildings, and to see two members of Outpost 31 before they went to Antarctica was an added little bonus. And as I said, Joan Hackett's brilliant in it. So thanks so much for watching. Please let me know if you've seen The Terminal Man and what you think of it, and hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.